The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Our return guest today, James Bean, was on last week's show of NDE Radio, and before that, some 2 years ago. If you want to go back to our past shows button, you'll find him on the show of May 8th, 2017. James is a comparative religion scholar and a book reviewer, author, public speaker, broadcaster, and podcaster with a broad familiarity with global religions and spiritual traditions. He's been involved with public radio, Radio for Peace International, the community radio movement, which is a station that I was on at WERU FM in Blue Hill, Maine for a while, and Wisdom Radio, where he was on for about a decade on Sirius satellite radio. These days, James is an independent producer currently creating programs for several stations. James, welcome back once again to NDE Radio.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Well, it's great to hear your voice. James, last Monday we were talking about the show you did for Spiritually Awakening Radio entitled Multiverses, Dimensions, and Near-Death Experiences. And we talked a lot about the mystical revelations that people have come up with in the past in other religions and the Eastern religions and so forth, that there are many worlds, countless worlds out there besides our Earth. But I thought this show we might talk more about Earth and what I feel is the sacredness of our planet and how sad it is that we seem to be in the process of destroying it. And crossed my mind, everyone loves Psalm 23 in the Bible, but Psalm 24 has some truth to it too. Let me read just the opening to that. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof is what the King James says, but in the more modern translation, it's the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. So many fundamentalist Christian groups think the earth is just the domain of the devil and it's to be as discarded as quickly as possible. They're looking for an end times, and in a way bringing it about because of things like the burning of the Amazon forest, what they call the lungs of our planet. But there's a lot of text, I think, especially, don't you, James, in other traditions besides the Christian that see the earth as a wonderful and glorious place and something to be protected.
It is considered to be sacred, and especially in connection with human beings, since we are conscious, sentient, intelligent beings, we have the ability to choose, and there's a lot of wisdom about how to behave, ethics, compassion. And so even with religions that believe in illusion, that the physical world is illusion, and or Maya, as they say, but they too teach that we should be very compassionate. And so dealing with climate change, not treating the world as a trash can, is very much in harmony with all of the wisdom traditions, East and West. We should not be treating the earth as a trash can, even if we do believe in illusion or heavens or that this is temporary and we're going to go someplace else. How we behave during this life is indeed very central. And those near-death experiencers, when they come back, they don't say, hey, let's all jump off a bridge. They believe in compassion and that they have a work to complete while in the body, which is important.
That's really you're right. It's an important point. If it's so much better over there than it is here, why don't people, and if God loves us no matter what we do to ourselves or others, which is another kind of new age take on near-death experience, why don't we all just why don't we just, throw ourselves off a bridge as soon as we're able?
The all bacon diet.
Yeah. Right. Or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Because we've learned something more about the nature of love and being channels for God's love here on the planet. This was our garden. Adam and Eve were given a garden to tend, and we inherited it. We're doing a terrible job of it, but the capacity to save it is probably still there with God's help. And it seems to me to be such an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's an easy thing to understand that if we could just be channels for God's love, you know what it's like? It's like that, Hawaiian meditation, the Ponopono mantra, that goes, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. It's kind of the essence of all religion. If you could live, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. It embodies everything that God asks of us, basically. If we just dealt with one another in those simple terms, and if we just dealt with what Jesus taught of feeding the hungry and clothing the poor and scorning the surplus wealth of the world in exchange for, sharing, basically. This could be a wonderful place.
Yeah, and the mystic tradition does speak about how what we're attached to in this life, where our treasure is now, does affect where we end up in the future. And so the more loving, more compassionate we are, the less self-centered in this life, that determines, where we end up in the future, or part of our, we're I believe in a very nuanced, many heavens, many levels, many layers, many realms. And so what we do in this life does indeed affect the future. And so it really can't be separated out into this life and then eternity, like eternity is on the other side of a concrete wall. It's all our journey, our story, here as well as there.
And as far as the idea that this is a matrix world, there's one near-death experiencer who told me when she died and was on the other side and was being given a guided tour, basically, of a beautiful landscape, beautiful fields and woods and so forth. She noticed as she looked behind her, and she said it was as if the scene was disappearing. And she asked her guide about it, and the guide said, "Oh, well, this is created for you." So in other words, we talk about this as a virtual world, but that experience of that near-death experience that some people experience could be just created as a personal connection between God and the earth. In other words, it's perhaps a way we can understand the hereafter. We're understanding the hereafter, in other words, in this here term, rather than in some sort of sitting on a cloud with playing a harp and blissing out. Right.
They do speak of the ability to create, on the astral level. If you think it can be real there. You can conjure up, different realities, and that as a technique for newbies, that are coming through, to kind of create for them an environment that's a good transition or waiting room or foyer between worlds. That does make sense.
You'd mentioned a conversation we had been having that the third heaven is the Garden, the Garden of Eden, replicated in heaven, or perhaps
right. And the Book of Enoch describes the Garden of Eden as still there. And so the fall of Adam is sort of like falling into the physical realm and being naked, as opposed to being this kind of luminous being clothed in light on this other level. So they have it as a kind of present tense reality that we've kind of that's now invisible to humanity.
Well, and you wonder why it was apart from the world, one way or another. Maybe it was in a different dimension, or maybe it was just fenced off. Somehow there was a great hedge around it that kept the influences of, I don't know, dinosaurs, dangerous animals, hostile people on the other side, while Adam and Eve were protected. But that, I suppose, could just have been a shielding of grace as well. And when they realize, go ahead.
Yeah, that there is that description, isn't there? Yeah, it is described as kind of another etheric realm, another dimension, and is still there, and we're trying to regain that. And so I think climate change actually kind of ties in with that, or mitigating climate change and the future of humanity. What choices we will make? Do we want to go toward creating a paradise on Earth, or something more hellish? That's really in our hands to choose right now. What do we want for a future Earth?
And maybe that
our choice right now.
Maybe that choice and the results of our choice is what will be judged by. I mean, we're counting on an all-forgiving God, but if we destroy His creation, He's not going to be too pleased about it, I wouldn't think.
No, it's bizarre that religion sometimes is opposed to doing the right thing. You think of religion as appealing to our better nature, so you would expect all religions and all denominations to be leading the way to fixing climate change or global warming, rather than being in the way of doing something about climate change. It's weird.
Well, it is. It's weird and it's sad, and I think it's a fundamental lack of understanding. We say we trash this place and then we expect to go on. Well, how many landlords want you to move uptown and give you a better apartment if you've trashed the apartment you've been living in? It's
right.
It's just not logical that we would be if we go to the third heaven and destroy Eden once again, what happens then? Are we just going to be forgiven constantly? Or do we lose free will? At that point, do we lose our free will and we just do what God asks of us?
I think we just would repeat the cycle, or those folks would just be back in the physical world like now, to do it over again, like doing over the second grade. Just till we get it right.
They say the death of the Amazon would mean, I think, 20% less oxygen in the world for our increasing population to breathe.
It would be pretty serious. And also there are all these neat plants that are medicinal, and we don't even know much about most of them. I take, it's acai. It's a berry that's ground up into, it looks like coffee grounds, and you just stir it into your green tea or whatever. And that comes from South America, and all of those wonderful things, cocoa or cacao, and there's a million other plants, exotic plants. The rainforest is an ancient, complex world of its own, and there's a lot of cures for diseases and wonderful medicinal and foods, a lot of seeds and nuts and fruit. So it's insane to destroy it. And actually, they can make more of a living. And there's been some progress in some parts of Brazil selling, acai and other products and making it into a sustainable thing. Who would have thought? I know. It's good to go in that direction.
If they took some care and actually sought out the medicine men who might still be around to tell them which plant and which herb and which mushroom is good for this or that condition, the money they could make selling it to the pharmaceutical industry synthesize would be vastly greater than cutting the whole thing down and planting soybeans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's in our own best interest to save the Amazon from even a capitalist point of view.
Right.
It makes no sense to destroy such a complex ecosystem. We're just, attacking our own future. And hopefully they will preserve the rainforest. There's a lot of protests and discussion about boycotting the Brazilian economy to try and force them, to do the right thing, or help them fight the fires currently going on in the Amazon. We're trying to nudge them into being, because for many years Brazil was fairly open to falling short of the goal, but at least they seem to be into the idea of preserving the Amazon, whereas under their current administration, not so much lately. So there's a lot of concern.
No, he's a populist who basically gave them a blanket permission to set fires because a lot of the local farmers would like to burn an area big enough for them to plant a crop, or to graze cattle and or sheep, I guess. But and now he's created this monster because there's something like 10,000 fires burning, and most of them have been set. And he doesn't have even sending in the army isn't going to be enough to put out with the limited equipment they have. The whole world, as a matter of fact, should be massing, planes water dropping planes and that sort of thing right now because it's important to everybody, not just to Brazil.
Yeah,
Bolivia's
the
got
Europeans
big fires
are working
too.
on that, or trying to negotiate with Brazil about sending in some firefighters.
Right. But if we could just, the Earth has the capacity to support even a population as large as the one we've got right now. I don't know how much more growth it could sustain, but if we could just get behind birth control and limit the growth of the population, we could have a sustainable Garden of Eden here. And then the transition from here to there would be, when we die, would be so much more in keeping with what we understand God's wishes to be.
Living up to our religions.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
so.
some religions are just so antagonistic to the idea of life on Earth.
Yeah,
except when it comes to pastors who want to have that second jet and a bunch of other worldly things that
they seem to be doing good. I'm enjoying that series on HBO now. What's it called? The Righteous Gemstones. It's about one of those. It's kind of a generic corrupt TV evangelist type mission and how what they're like in person behind closed doors. It's really hilarious. It's a dark comedy.
Yeah. I haven't seen it, but we've been watching one on Amazon called The Family about this Christian group that sponsors the National Prayer Day in Washington, where all the congressmen and the presidents always come. They've attended since the days of Eisenhower, and the National Prayer Breakfast.
Right,
it's run by a group called the Family or the Fellowship. They stay very much behind the scenes, but they're pushing a conservative Christian agenda on the people in power. They only want to really deal with the politicians and the wealthy, the oligarchs. And
so it's sort of an entity, a group with an agenda, and we hardly even have heard their name, and yet they're tugging on the strings of power in high places.
Exactly.
Wow. Everyone blames the Illuminati for being the shadow government.
Yes.
And yet here's the reality, right?
Christians are as guilty as anyone, I guess, when it comes to trying to influence power. Jesus had nothing to do with it. He let the Romans be, but he was very tough on the Pharisees, the priests and the Pharisees who said one thing and did another.
Yes. Yeah, he was very anti-Pharisee. There's never a criticism of the Essenes, but yeah, the Sadducees and Pharisees are the ones that are singled out in the Gospels as being the chief rivals, or in the way.
Mm. Well, the Essenes were living a pretty simple life, weren't they? Wasn't it a monastic group?
Sort of, yeah. Some of them were. Well, there were some Essenes that lived in cities, householder-type Essenes, but they had the group in Qumran and kind of a monastic group. And also near Alexandria, Egypt, they had a kind of co-ed monastery community or intentional community, and some living a more sadhu or monkish type lifestyle, would go to those kind of places. And early Christianity is kind of close to the Essene point of view. I think of the Jesus movement as being the grandchildren of the Essenes, or kind of related to the Essenes, sharing a lot of the same beliefs, and scriptures too, including the book of First Enoch, kind of related to the Essenes, which is why they're not really criticized in the New Testament, because they kind of are related to the Essenes, taking the Essene point of view.
Do you think it would have made a difference if the Book of Enoch had been included in the accepted scriptures? It was kicked out by both the Christian, the church fathers, and by the Jewish hierarchy, so neither tradition was really carrying it on except in Ethiopia.
Right. Yeah, the Ethiopian Bible is a little bit closer to the Bible of Jude in the New Testament. The Epistle of Jude quotes Enoch and refers to a story found in another book called The Assumption of Moses. They got rid of a lot of books. We have 27 books of the New Testament, but I'm a fan of second century scriptures, and it's a very big collection. You've got like scores of Acts of Apostles and scores of Gospels and some Psalms. There's a beautiful collection of Psalms it's now called the Odes of Solomon, but it has nothing to do with Solomon. So I like calling it the Book of the Odes. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. It's as if the composers of the Gospel of John came out with a hymnal. That's what the Odes reads like. It's really quite beautiful.
I've read some passages. I've never read the whole thing. I should look that up.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest collections of Psalms, I think, ever. It's kind of right at the crossroads of Judaism and early Christianity, especially Antioch, Gospel of John type community. It's kind of related, I think, to the Gospel of John community that once existed. I'm a fan of all of that second century Christian scriptures, Gospel of Peter, and it's pretty vast. So they not only selected the books of to make up the canon, but they sort of wiped out the library, because you have all of these other texts, a huge number, hundreds of them, and some of them are quite nice, I found.
Now, would you say, generally speaking, the Gnostics were scornful of the physical world, of the earth, basically, and looking more toward the spiritual?
Some of them were. The Valentinians seemed to be more of the moderate Gnostics. They seemed to almost be kind of Catholic in a way. They had Mass, and they seemed more moderate. Certainly part of the belief system of everyone was that the flesh is temporary and the world is a dark place ruled by principalities and powers. And so that kind of goes with the territory of most religions.
One of the things that I've heard from some people who've had out-of-body experiences is that we're surrounded by consciousness, even inanimate objects. Your desk you're sitting at, and of course living things like trees and plants and so forth are manifestations of God's consciousness, not all vibrating at the same level, of course, but
yeah, there's a verse of Rumi poetry that speaks of stones as having a slight degree of consciousness.
yeah. So, I would think that we in our consciousness should respect that consciousness. If we can't deal with, just the beauty of a physical tree, why not think of the consciousness of the tree? And there's a recent book out about how trees communicate with each other through their root system and through the air. That is phenomenal. I mean, there is truly a consciousness, and it's a high level of consciousness in groups of trees.
Right, the secret life of plants. Hook lie detectors up to plants and get some sense of reaction.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's so many things that we haven't fully investigated here before we start yearning to merge with the light. I think we should try merging with a few trees, at least in our own minds, and come to understand what the multiplicity of this creation is all about.
Yeah, nature. You have to have a certain love for nature and the world, meaning the earth around us.
Yeah.
There has to be enough of that so as to counter the greed. All the decisions to destroy the Amazon rainforest is obviously not made by a nature lover, but someone who's just living in a greed business bottom line kind of world.
Right.
And so they're not fully awake themselves. They need to expand their
Right.
consciousness a bit, since their decisions are affecting the future of the world.
Right. Well, if you're burning off a portion of the richness of the Amazon rainforest in order to plant, genetically modified soy crops, I mean, God help us. Talk about going from a higher vibration to a much lower vibration. Even in the plant world, it's a huge mistake.
Yeah, just greed in control of the world, plutocracy, a kind of a plutocratic dictatorship, and we're all workers for great plutocrats. That ultimately is insanity. That is really literally the lemmings running over the cliff. One more profitable quarter before the end of the world. That's where it goes. I
know, and not to think beyond that. Even when your children and your grandchildren are already facing a cruel world, coming up very, within a few years. Now there was an Australian study that said 2030 was a tipping point, and so it's right around the corner.
Yeah, with the climate change, we're way ahead of schedule. Rather than being an overhyped thing, actually it's happening faster than we realize and is ahead of schedule at every single marking point. And what really concerns me about climate change is as the North melts, that there could be releases of methane that's been held in a frozen state for millions of years or tens of thousands of years. And so all of a sudden, in 5 years from now, we're already at the 2050 model.
Right.
We're already there because of all of this melting causing the methane release. That's methane in the oceans, methane that's been frozen underground in Siberia and elsewhere in the north.
So all going to be bubbling up.
Yes, yeah. So actually, it's probably going to be a lot worse. But I think ultimately I'm optimistic that we'll save most of it. I think humanity works like as follows. We lose New Orleans, and then we go, oh, okay, we need to really care. We need a little bit of devastation in order to change the political will. And so people aren't rational and looking at science. They just, read in their headlines about we've lost a city now.
Right. Well, we need leaders too that will acknowledge that things are being lost. Trump's take on Puerto Rico, for instance, left a lot to be desired.
Right. They're trying to suppress the scientists or fire the scientists and ignore the science. But it's not going to work.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear one hopeful note as we close out for today.
I'm optimistic that those who are standing in the way will be voted out of office, and we can get on with fixing climate change.
Me too.
Ultimately.
Me too. Hey, thank you, James. This has been terrific. I'm so glad you could do this and last week's show as well.
Oh, my pleasure.
I guess all I can tell people that missed the conference is you'll be able to go online through IANDS.org and get recordings and I think eventually videos of the major talks that were given there. So for more on that, please go to IANDS.org. And if you'd like to listen to this show again or any of our past shows, go to our website at nderadio.org. And join us again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.